Welcome to the Meru Media podcast with Mukunda.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Meru Media podcast. My name is Mukunda, and today I am joined by Brahmachari Vrajavihari Sharan. It's a long name, but it's very apt because he comes from a long tradition of great spiritual masters. I mean, not that term, but gurus, acharyas, and seekers. He comes from the Nimbarkacharya Sampradaya, which is it's one of the six darshanas six philosophies in the Vedantic tradition that are major ones. So we'll actually let him talk about it more than me because I'm not an expert at that. A brahmachari or Vrajavihari, or what do you prefer to be called? Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Mukunda. Thank you for dealing with the name. I think that when my Guruji was giving me this name, he wanted to make sure that I would have to explain how to say it every time, as a good way of helping me to understand humility more.
Sure,
I think it works.
Yeah, I mean, I have a long name too. My full name is Mukunda Madhava Seshashaya Vijayaraghavan. Right?
Wow, so, lovely.
Long name. It's all Vishnu names.
Rama and Krishna all in one, right?
All Vishnu names, right? When you belong to that Sri Vaishnavite Sampradaya, you get all.
I see. Very nice, very nice. No, my students call me Dr. Sharan. My colleagues call me Brahmachari or Brahmachari-ji. Whatever is good with you works. Right. Completely fine.
Okay, Brahmachari-ji is fine if that works. I mean, sure. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself? What's your background? This is to become a Brahmachari in the 21st century. That's got to take a lot of gumption, right? It's unique.
It does, and I'm actually glad that the way that we philosophize the reasoning behind the Brahmacharya Vrata is a little bit different than the Dharma Shastras outline it. Okay. And I think that's a good way of jumping into the discussion of what Nimbarkacharya Sampradaya is and why we are as the way we are.
Yeah,
we're not very known even amongst Hindus when I go across India or in the diaspora.
Yeah,
and I don't mention Nimbat Bhagwan because our philosophy, at the first and foremost, the most basic level, is to help human beings become and retain their status as human beings.
Right.
And so the Nimbark's discussion is one you'd have, way down the line, after someone has gotten past, basics of karma theory, basics of dharma theory, and all of that kind of thing.
So what do you, I want to get into your backstory also, but I just want to flesh out this idea. What do you mean human beings are human?
Yes. Well, you have all of these subhashitas, the ones that are famous, like ahara nidra bhayame tunancha, those eating, sleeping, protecting what we have, and procreation are all common between humans and all animals.
Yeah.
Right. What makes us different than an animal? Well, it's our sense of depends on who you're reading, either dharma or jnana, whichever one.
Right.
And the problem that we've come across has been that people are more likely to give up on universal morals if they feel that they have a justification for it.
Okay.
Especially if that justification is given a divine kind of stamp. And our major concern is to help people realize that divine stamps are subjective. We need to focus on objective universal morals first. If you've got that sorted, then you can deal with the divine. Otherwise,
that's very interesting. I want to get into that. But let's get your background first, because your journey's. To make the decision to be a brahmachari, there must have been something interesting that led you down that path. So how did you get to there, and how did you find that path?
Was actually despair. So I was born in London. And the community that I belong to are from the West Indies.
Yeah.
And I had very solid interest in our dharma for a while because, my parents raised us as best as they could. They were not rich by any means, and they struggled quite hard in the UK. And the one or two questions that I had at that time, obviously they were ill-equipped to answer them. And another problem was that there were very few people around us that were equipped to answer them.
Yeah.
And the Pandits, when we interfaced with them, would always give me a story. And the stories are great. They're good for certain people, but I don't know why my mind is a little bit more focused on facts and things like that. The answers obviously fell short, through no fault of their own. And so I became very, very, very atheist. And I would retain notions of what atheism taught me.
And how old were you when you were atheist?
Oh, through my teenage years, through high school. But
it's interesting. Many people go through it around that time, right?
It is. The thing that I think was helpful for me was that I never lost the love of Sanskrit. And if that meant that I would go to religious arenas in order to get more and more information about Sanskrit, I would.
Okay.
So it was more a confluence of interest in quantum physics and the finding out that there was more to Vedanta than Advaita Vedanta that made me start to give more time to Vedanta again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And then, I mean, that's an intellectual pursuit. How'd you decide that you're going to do this massive lifestyle and shift of your mentality pursuit?
When I got more and more involved with the Nimbarkacharya Sampradaya, I realized that we were dying. Our last great Jagat Guru passed away in 2016. And when I was with him the last few times, he made mention on numerous occasions that of your generation, you're the only one that, number one, has all the manuscripts, and number two, has the interest in researching them.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad to hear that after a tradition that has had the length of time that it has on this planet. Right. And the toss-up is always between, well, are you going to research and teach, or are you going to try and have a family whilst researching and teaching?
Yeah.
The amount of material I have could easily last somebody 2 or 3 lifetimes worth to translate and do justice to. And I would never want to visit the kind of, I would call it hinsa, violence, that you do on a family that you, number one, set up, and then number two, don't give enough time to afterwards.
Right, right.
So it's a difficult decision, but I'm glad again that the decision is not based on Western ideals of celibacy, but Eastern notions on celibacy, which is you are giving yourself fully to the task that you've selected, and you know what you're getting into.
Right.
So as a human being, you try to live up to those ideals rather than have some divine puppet master following you around all the time.
Right. I mean, there's a couple threads here that I kind of want to pull at. One is first, sorry for these questions, but I love to learn people's background. And I think a lot of our viewers do too. You're from Guyana, or not Guyana, sorry, West Indies. Where in West Indies is your family from? Sorry, I just assumed that. That was my fault.
It was a very good guess. Very good guess. So I can trace my family back to Varanasi.
Okay.
But before I was born, my parents moved here from Guyana.
Okay. So how long was your family in the West Indies? And do you know how they got there?
Yeah, I know how they got there. They went as part of the indentureship system, and indentureship is taught of in very different ways. Another piece of the puzzle that people don't recognize is that there were different types of people brought across for different reasons.
Right.
My family came across in all of those realms, right? From working in the fields all the way through to translating and interpreting for the British rulers. So from in amongst there, it was actually the people who were working in the fields that, it's a weird story. My great-great-grandfather used to keep Shalagramaji as the seva that they used to do at their home. Yeah. And he worked for his 5 years. He actually got on the boat back to Kolkata. He got off at Kolkata. In Kolkata, it was nighttime and he would not get any connections to go back to Varanasi. So he was looking for a place to stay. Some sadhu turned up and said, "Oh, I have a dharmshala." So he went with the sadhu. He did his seva and put his belongings and everything else under his head.
Yeah.
Was going to have a sleep, and he says, "Oh no, don't sleep on an empty stomach." So they go and eat. When he comes back, he goes to sleep and he wakes up 3 days later. Everything but the Shaligramji is gone.
Wow.
So he called for his family from Varanasi, said, "Whoever's coming, come, you bring whatever we have, and we're going back and we're going to live there." And so that's what he did. So our family settled over there. And with what they had from Varanasi, they were able to get a very small piece of land off the British, and they expanded that and gave homes to all the people that were suffering down there. And so even that village is still called Narish village in Guyana, just because the family tried to help as many people as they could before dictatorship started in the 60s.
Wow. So how long has your family been in the West Indies, in Guyana?
The documents I've read, my mother's side would have gotten there in the 1870s, and my father's side got there in 1893.
Okay. And during that time, they still did the indentured servitude?
Oh, yeah. Indentureship was only abolished in the 1920s.
Wow.
And in some places, it went further than that.
Now, do you guys have a family history about like kind of stories that kind of connected to that? I mean, it especially like when we're talking now in this day and age where there's a lot of discussion as to nature of slavery, indentured servitude, and how different ethnic groups experiences with the colonial powers and the colonial experience itself. And in some sense, yeah, we can say the white man's imposition of their world and their world vision upon most of the world. I think it's very important to capture, what happened to people like your grandparents and, people that came from Africa and the sense of, I mean, not comparing at all, but just how different and how unique these experiences of suffering were provided just to extract some sort of labor or control over another human being.
Yeah. I mean, while I'm not an expert, I tend to tell people, consider one thing. Yeah. You're a slave owner one day, and your slaves have been emancipated. The people you've enslaved have been emancipated against your wishes by the government.
Yeah.
And then they provide you another set of people who you still consider heathen and uncivilized.
Yeah.
To work on the same property, doing the same jobs in the same places, in the same conditions. Do you think that their attitudes would have changed dramatically between the time that they had enslaved people and the time that they had indentured people?
Of course not.
That's my question. Obviously, trying to trace that up through a period of history which is heavily undocumented is going to be very difficult. But when I've spoken to people's grandparents, that was one thing I liked to do, was to speak to people's grandparents, people who could remember living through, or at least having parents who lived through those times. You tend to get a very different picture about how people were living then.
Right.
And again, living in loji is the same lodgings that the enslaved were forced to live in. I would say the one thing that I would definitely always say is different is the way that the enslaved people were treated after transportation. The kinds of physical punishments were a lot more pronounced.
Yeah.
But the liberties that is taken with a human being, I don't think that they ever changed.
Right.
So my respect will always be with the enslaved and the descendants of the enslaved.
Right.
And also with those who were part of the indentureship system.
Sure.
This notion that people went of their free accord, you've seen it in scholars' literature, like people went because the British had engineered famines that were affecting the entire northern belt of the countries or the territories at that point. So when people say, oh, they went of their free accord, I'm like, let's try and look at that again with some human compassion and human realism and see what would have been going on at that point in time.
Right, because we know, these are pretty well-settled facts in the late 19th century and the 20th century, throughout the course of places like Bengal and regions like that, they engineered many, many famines.
1856 is a major Bengal famine,
right?
And Union Territory's famine.
Yeah.
People know about that, and it's no small coincidence that your big numbers of people start immigrating being taken through the indentureship system from 1865 onwards.
Right.
You get your next major famine in the 1870s. Yeah. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting enough. From my reading of much of Indian historiography, there weren't too many famines in the course of Indian history that compared to much of the rest of the world before that period of time, where in that kind of spread. There were ones here and there, but not not like four in the span of a century. That's a little unprecedented.
It is definitely unprecedented.
But I mean, there's a lot of attention not given to these kind of incidences. But to cut back to your story, another thing I tend to notice is between people from the West Indies and other desis directly from India in some sense, there always seems to be a little bit of tension or different. I don't know if there's tension or there's a differentiation between the two. I mean, could you speak to that? Did you ever experience that? And yeah, I mean.
That was a very, very interesting dynamic to try and live through.
Yeah.
Obviously, the association of the indentureship system with following on the heels of the slave trade meant that even Indians who were remaining in India, that they were perceiving the people taken across as if they were slaves too. And so I was, I learned Hindi once I had gotten to India.
Yeah.
And it then dawned upon me that people were using words like niche and, few friends from different traditions were using the words kafir and all of those words quite regularly when they were talking about West Indian people, even in the UK.
Wow.
Which was kind of interesting. Now, for the benefit of those people who are in the UK, the Indians who came over straight from India or through Africa to the UK, those people tended to be a little bit more sensible because they had lived with folk from the West Indies and they had seen how everybody's working hard together, and they see that these people who can't speak Hindi any longer because the British beat it out of them,
right.
They still sing from the Ramcharitmanas. They all know the Hanuman Chalisa. They all sing the Aarti. They all forget religious stuff. They all sing the same old Bollywood nonsense from the 1960s and 40s. So it's really the problem was when I went to India. Jati and caste still being such a big problem. It's very easy for folk to put you in a box. But thankfully, the renunciate path is one that liberates you from those boxes. Right. And it also helps if you can speak Sanskrit at them.
One of the few times Sanskrit speaking or knowledge comes into play.
Oh, yes. To try and help people realize their follies when it comes to boxing people.
Right. It's I mean, let me say that, Jess. I mean, I think Sanskrit comes into play in so many great, amazing ways in our lives when you know the language. But nonetheless, I mean, I find that it's always it's tough to, we do talk loftily about our tradition and our culture and these great maxims in our from India or whatever, and then you see how Indian people treat each other in some ways. And these, and I'm not going to say Varna distinctions. I don't know if it's Varna. I don't know if it's Jati. I don't know if it's caste. There are all some mix of that. There's great authors, Nicholas Dirks and a few other people write about the history of caste. So I'm not going to say this is like an ancient tradition, but it is found in places like Mahabharata and various other texts where you still have these strains of treating other human beings differently because they're born as a particular community or a particular group. And that's sad. Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm just saying sad.
Yeah, I mean, the Mahabharata is a great example of a text that is really listening to and composed by the people that are on the streets listening to it.
Yeah.
So we know that there is obviously this core of the Mahabharata, but as it was performed by people across ancient India, that it was incorporating local stories, local customs. You get the whole notion of Dharma being questioned by the other dharmic people is really, really lifted up in the Mahabharata. There's a lovely discussion between Jajali and Tuladhara, Rishi versus a businessman. It's the businessman that actually knows the truth, not the Rishi, because he's still so haughty and arrogant about him being from this pure Brahmin class, and this guy's just this old, ration seller in Varanasi, funnily enough.
I mean, there's great stories like that. There's Sulabha and Janaka, which is fantastic. And then there's, even the Chandala and Vishwamitra. which is another
Yeah.
great conversation, right, for about Dharma and things of that nature. But, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, touching on this point, you know, that we're still on is from the West Indies perspective, does caste, Varna, Jati, any of it still play in that world or no? Or, I mean, moving across the entire
Yeah.
continents, and
Yeah.
does that change how you view yourselves? Is it just like you go to larger community, or do you still, I mean, it's the dynamics have to be.
Dynamics are very different. The dynamics are different. I feel at once West Indian and non-West Indian. I feel
Yeah.
at once Indian and non-Indian. I feel at once English and non-English. I feel at once American and non-American. But I think that the more and more I've gotten to live with Dharma, I
Yeah.
will say that my identity, whatever you want to call the identity I have, I would say that my identity is dharmic.
Yeah.
I don't think I have any other identity that I would, want to defend.
Yeah.
Because of how much it has given me. I
Sure.
think that one identity is beyond nation, beyond geography, beyond time, place, and circumstance. That
Absolutely.
identity is eternal for me.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would say that when a lot of the people that went over to the West Indies from India, they were coming from two places, either Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, that kind of area, or from Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
From the Madras presidency at the point. And when you go to when you go to the West Indies now, you look for people's surnames like Sharma, you look for surnames such as Verma or Singh or those kinds of names. You will find a few Singhs, you will find a few Mishirs and a few Shuklas and a few of those people. But 9 times out of 10, those people's surnames are Ram Bharosa, Ram Bharose, Ram Naresh, Ram Raja. I've heard so many permutations of names of Lord Ram as people's surnames. And I thought that it was because people simply took their parents' first name as their surname. Whilst that did happen in certain cases, most people actively took Ramji's name as their surname to erase any differences that were discernible through somebody's surname.
Wow.
And that has a great deal to do with most people belonging to the so you have Ramanujacharya giving rise to the Sri Vaishnava tradition, but Ramanandacharya up in the north, who focus a lot more on Ram Bhakti. You have a lot more of people belonging to Ramananda's Sampradaya in Guyana. So people would have their shaligram or picture of Ramji inside their house where they would do their pujas. And outside they would have a little small temple to Lord Shiva. They would call it the Shivalaya. Where they would go and do Shivji's Abhishek in the morning. And right there, they would also have a jhanda, a flag pole to Hanumanji, which is a typical, very Ramanandi setup.
So last year I talked to Ramdas Slam. I don't know if you know who he is.
Oh, yes.
So he's Ramanandi Sampradaya. And so that was it's great to learn about his work with the Ramanamis. You know, that was
right.
It's very similar in that sense, right? Where people find in the name of Rama, Krishna, Shiva, they find the ability to transcend their caste or birth or economic status and get into what they would call the family of God as opposed to the family of man.
Yes.
So I mean, the history, we could talk a long time just about the West Indian experience, but and that's important. But that as a brahmachari, when you take that vow, that life kind of goes on the back end, right? Where your new life is focusing on your goal. So what is the goal of brahmachari here for you?
I don't know if I have a specific goal that is related to the life choice, but one of the things that I wanted to do when I took up the tradition was to find out more and more about Vedanta. And having found out the amount that I know about Vedanta, I've realized that there's a lot more, and that's why I went around collecting the manuscripts I did for the PhD.
Right.
But having collected those manuscripts, as I spoke of our Jagat Guru who passed in 2016, there's nobody working on it. And they're not working on it because when they get to the scholarship, they see the legacy of colonial scholarship as very, very difficult to pull apart. To decolonize that area of scholarship is very difficult because I was talking to a professor, and they said it quite nicely. It doesn't matter whether you're DMK or Hindutva, or whether you are anti-Brahmin or pro-Brahmin,
Yeah.
or Hindu or Christian. When you are learning where you're taking your education in India, you are learning what the colonials taught us.
Yeah. About yourself.
About yourself. And so it doesn't matter if you're a Hindutvavadi or if you're a DMK. You're both of you using the epistemological tools that the British gave us.
Right.
And that have been regurgitated and reformulated. All of the reform that has happened in India has happened along the lines of the Protestant British.
Yeah. Yeah.
And before that, you can see with the other communities that ruled India that there were similar dynamics then. But the overarching ones now are more important because they're global, because the effect of the British enterprise was more global than the other rulers beforehand.
Absolutely.
So when what that does to our tradition specifically is that they're presumed not to have existed because they don't find mention in the traditional sources, when they're not taking into account that traditional sources are always the sources of the well-funded ruler and their chosen guru or acharya. Right. What do you do with a tradition like the Nimbark tradition that is living in the forest, eschewing everything else, doesn't have any links to any royal house until the 16 and 1700s, and chooses that as a way to live into the morals of Vedanta that are called for?
Yeah.
It makes the task very difficult. So for me, I think that no matter what I may have desired as a human being beforehand, I think with this sense of history, the sense of connection that I feel to the call of Vedanta, and also to the call of living it as well, not just talking about it and teaching it, I think that that's why I'm comfortable in the path that I'm in.
Excellent. Wow. I mean, you got your PhD. Did you get that when you were in the Brahmachari phase, or after, or before that?
Did it? Yes, it was during the Brahmachari phase. Yes. I had to rethink there. So, Zoom has done a lot with my mind. Yes, 20, I only got my PhD 5 years ago.
Okay.
So I was definitely
in India or in UK?
In UK, from the University of Edinburgh. I did my master's there. I had intended to do my PhD at Oxford, but while I was at Oxford for that first term, the professor that I was hoping to do the PhD under, he retired. So the next best professor that was available was actually the original professor back in Edinburgh. So I went back. Was
it Nicholas Sutton that retired?
No. It was I wanted to do my PhD with Alexis Sanderson, but he retired that year.
Okay.
And so I went back to do the PhD with Paul Dundas, who is a global expert on Jainism.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. Is that what your PhD was, on Jainism, or?
No. My PhD was on Vedanta. And so imagine how interesting it was to talk with an expert on Jainism about something that he was completely not interested in.
Well, they got, pardon my French, they got taken to task a lot with the Vedantic test too, right? Yes, a lot of people would attack Jain philosophy and the straw man of Buddhism in some sense. I don't think most of the Vedantins understood the concept of shunya or madhyamika.
No. Prima facie in Vedanta is always a very, I would take it with a grain of salt. It was more I have an opinion about you guys that I'm going to take as your
exactly. It wasn't rigorous study done. No. But okay, so you become a brahmachari now, and how did you get your PhD, and then you decide to move to the US, or was it just did something call you to come to these hallowed states of America?
Oh, so then you get into a bit more murky waters. The path of the brahmachari lies in their ashram, right?
Yeah.
But in order to make ashrams work these days, you have to involve yourself in the cycles of donors, donations, and all sorts of things that are really, it's like oil and water with me. It does not make any sense. And more importantly, in order to sustain those kinds of institutions, you have to be working on that rather than working on the research. Mm-hmm. Both of them are all encompassing. Both of them demand the full measure of your time.
Yeah.
And to me, the more important of those two things was to work on the research.
Yeah.
So I once completed the PhD, I worked at the University of Cardiff and at the University of London teaching Sanskrit, hoping that I would have the time to focus on the research. That was a pipe dream. It remained a very, very distant dream. And I thought that, well, maybe I needed to move out of the teaching mode when happenstance was I typed in the search term Hindu into the search engines for jobs, and while I had typed in Hinduism before, thinking of a professor of Hinduism or Sanskrit, no jobs were coming up. One job came up for Hindu, and that was the job at Georgetown University for a chaplain. And I thought, that would be interesting. So that's where I ended up.
Wow. I love Georgetown University. It's a beautiful school. It's set in a nice area. It's Catholic, which is really interesting, right? In the sense that the first Hindu chaplain in all of the United States, I don't know the world, but definitely the United States, is at a Catholic university. A place you probably wouldn't think about that.
No. So the accolade of the first chaplain goes definitely to Vineet Chandra over at Princeton.
Okay.
And there's also Asha Shipman in Yale, Professor Ramdas Lama at University of Hawaii. So there are, I think in terms of mainland US, there are 3 professional Hindu chaplains.
Yeah.
And about 27 or so volunteering Hindu chaplains. But in terms of ones that are a monk and a priest, so I had done my Karmakanda training as well.
Yeah.
That it's very, very weird that it is also the first appointment that a Catholic university has made to Hindu renunciates. So yeah, it's been a very interesting experience.
So we'll get into that in a second. Now you said Karmakanda. What shaka did you study?
So Shukla Yajurveda Madhyandaniya Shaka.
Oh wow! So you guys do instead of the Purusha, you say Puruka, and you have
yes, we are the Kakara people.
It's always fascinating to me. Like, it's funny to me. First of all, people love to say Veda, 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 and then most people haven't really even read a single line of any Veda. And then like they might know something for the Upanishads, which is the Veda. Yeah, I get that, but it's not the proper Brahmana portion of the Veda or the mantra portion of the Veda. So it's obviously when I learned some of it when I was young. Not a lot. Not definitely in your realm here. I have a few suktams I've learned and can chant. Nice. And obviously we've done, in our tradition we also do yajnas and homas and stuff. Right. So we have some of that.
Nice.
But I find that the differences between the shakas to be so beautiful, right? I'm sure you heard the Samaveda sung and how different and how and then it makes you think about the Gita. You're like, Vedanam Samavedosmi. I'm like, I understand where he's saying that.
Exactly. I mean, some of the nicest things was to see just see a yajna being performed by the Nambudiris.
Yeah.
And more importantly, see the style of shikha of the Nambudiri. I love it. I love that. I love, to see when Taittiriya Shakha Dhyayis come up and they come to Veda conferences and you see them with other people who are following the Yajurveda, but instead of just Varni, it's Yatha Varni Tatha Parni, Varni Parni Yatha Tatha, that the hand is moving, Hastaswaras, the hand gestures or the accents on the Shukla Yajurveda. When you see that and you hear the different basic one like Ganananta, if you hear that mantra just being chanted by both, it's such a wonderful diversity.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that there is no search for the quote unquote right version.
No. But we've known that from as far as back as our textual tradition goes, they've talked about the various shakas, right? Just they're just different ways of reciting, performing. But it's fascinating that there's no heterodox here. It's all just all mixed together. They're all like, cool, you're good to go. But so your Karmakanda training, how long did you do that for?
That was the full 6 years. I did not go into the entire, when it became apparent that they wanted us to learn, Ganparta and all of the other Jata and other types of partas that existed.
Right.
I said, well, I need to focus on this because at that same time I was interested more in Vedanta.
Right.
So enough to get me by.
Yeah.
And then the focus shifted to Vedanta.
Well, since we just ended with the Karmakanda, Brahma Sutra start with Ato Brahma Jignasa, right? So
Right.
in the same sense, like, Ramanuja interprets that as saying, after learning the Karmakanda, you go into this. Is that how Nimbarka approaches it too?
Nimbarka is he takes a very interesting approach to it. So if I usually remember the paraphrasing of his introduction to the first sutra, because he writes a very, very small commentary on each verse. It's his disciple Srinivasacharya that takes the time to really go into the depths that Shankaracharya was going into. So he says that having seen the hypocrisy of the world and the fruitlessness of activities, a person takes the time to study and learn more about what activities would lead to success. Having tried those activities and found them to be temporary, that person tries to understand the nature of these works and studies Karma Shastra. Once he has studied the Karma Shastra, he realizes that there are imbalances and human nature problems that affect them. So he goes for the eternal source of karma, which is Dharma Shastras. And he goes through Dharma Shastras and realizes that that too does not lead to final betterment. And with this sense of being utterly, not fatigue, but despondency, there we are, utter despondency, that person then chooses either to give up or to pick up the inquiry of Brahman. And it's at that point that the person will pick up an inquiry into Brahma Jigyasa. The Athato Brahma Jigyasa means once a person has gone through all of that, then a study into Brahman would be worthwhile.
Undertaken. Yeah. Wow. So now let's get into the topic du jour, Nimbarkacharya. Let's learn about Nimbarkacharya, right? Because he's one of the great acharyas, and especially in the Vaishnava tradition, but generally even in Vedantic tradition. There's a lot of discrepancy about his dates, which is it spans from the time of Arjuna's son Parikshit to all the way to the time before Shankara or after Ramanuja. There's so many, and this is part of me is at this stage. It's also like, if Indology can't figure out a fixed date, is it even a discipline at some level that can actually have a sense of engaging with the Indian tradition?
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's another point. So let's talk about Nimbarka. Who is Nimbarkacharya, and what's his story?
Well, let me start by painting a picture. When it comes to ancient Bharat, we know that there were the 16 Mahajanapadas, which should be translated as countries, plus the southern 3. So I would say 19 or 20, give or take, depending on what you're looking at. All of these different states, all of these different territories had different ways of dealing with society. But what we see after the second urbanization is this desire amongst a few kings to take the ideal of Ashwamedha and really apply it. Some say it's because they had interfaced with the Greeks or other kingdoms that were there at the time. Whatever reasons that you can conjecture at that moment in time is more based on extrapolation rather than facts. And what we do see, however, is that when these empires start to expand, the kings want to try and make things easier to collect taxes. Who do you look to in order to make your society work? Well, you look to Brahmins, and specifically which type of Brahmin? The Mimamsa Brahmins, because before it was the Mimamsa Brahmins or the Veda Brahman that would be the advisor to the king. And now, when you're needing to set up a new social structure, you also turn to them. I want to ask, do people read the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad? Do they pay attention to what Yajnavalkya says? He talks about Brahmins who are not crooked and lusty. And he makes that point numerous times in the course of one teaching. And you have to ask yourself, why? He is part of the Mimamsaka Brahmin fold. And it makes so much sense, therefore, that if you're working with expansionist kings whose eyes are filled with money and women and all those things, that the Brahmins who choose to work and live at the courts are also going to be comfortable with that kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that all Brahmins are comfortable with that kind of lifestyle? I would definitely say no.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure that there are numerous Mimamsaka Brahmins who were not interested in that life, but also from all the other traditions. Right? So when we hear of the Dharma Shastras and how they formulate society, you've got numerous people who are renouncing society for that very reason, that now you can see imbalances between people are being created when, in fact, the whole point of Vedanta is to awaken people to the fact that Atma is present in everybody.
Yeah.
So in amongst these renounces, you've got renounces of different types, but the type of renouncer that Nimbar Bhagwan is the Muni.
Mm-hmm.
Muni we hear first about in the Rig Veda, when the Rig Veda is talking about Munis in the forests who are excelling to the heights of the gods
Mm-hmm.
without actually being part of Vedic society, right? And so I would conjecture that Yagyavalkya could be considered a Muni once he renounces, because he too goes into the forests and does meditation practice there. Nimbar Bhagwan, similarly, is one of these people out in the forests. He's in his little jhopri, his little thatch hut,
Mm-hmm.
and he lives a life that is traveling from place to place and not going to look for people to teach. But if people hear that he's there and they want to see what knowledge he brings, in the way that of old people in old societies,
Mm-hmm.
they would come and listen and choose either to say, well, this is good, or not so. Nimbar Bhagwan is a very interesting character because he pays attention to the Prakrit sources, the folk tales, the folk history of India, and the Vedanta tradition, the Vedic tradition. Now we know, obviously, the stories talk of him being a Telanga Brahmana, born to Aruna Rishi, his father, Jayanti Devi, his mother. But these are stories that we hear of a lot later.
Yeah.
So you can put Nimbar Bhagwan where you want him, basically,
Right.
at this moment in time. But what we do know is that his view of forest dwelling and renunciation and living in the forest, whether you're a woman or man, means that you're committing yourself to live by the principles of Vedanta. If you're living by the principles of Vedanta, you're going to have a problem seeing other people suffering because of other human beings. You're going to have a problem seeing other forms of life, animals, nature itself suffering because of human beings. You're not going to try and change the system, because to try and take on a huge, powerful system as one person is much more difficult than trying to have that system change from within by working with people from a human to another human. Yeah. So that's where I think Nimbar Bhagwan works best. He affects inner transformation on a person-to-person basis, has no desire to create thousands and millions of followers.
Yeah.
His desire is to teach whoever he teaches with complete integrity.
Okay.
So that's what I think Nimbar Bhagwan's contribution is, and that's probably why we don't hear of him in any of the major historical sources. You hear about him in the peripheries, but not in the major ones.
Okay. And what was his story? How did he? What Sampradaya is? Was he the founder of it? Was there someone before him? And then what caused him to go down this path?
Right. The Guru Parampara, he refers to his Guru as Narad Muni. And so Narad Muni, whether you're taking it that he's looked at chapter 7 of the Chandogya Upanishad, had the dialogue between Sanat Kumara and Narad Muni as his ideal and made Narad Muni his Guru that way, or whether we follow the traditional sources in our tradition where we say that Narad Bhagwan actually saw Nimbar Bhagwan and became present before him to give him Diksha, to follow the teachings of the Renuncia Upanishads. Both of those options exist. You could choose one or the other.
Right.
So the parampara goes that Narayana took the form of Hansa, and Hansa instructed Sanak, Sanand, and Sanatan Sanat Kumar, and their disciple was Narad Rishi, and Narad Rishi's disciple is Nimbark Bhagwan or Nimbark Muni.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's inheriting a tradition. Funnily enough, Shaiva Siddhanta has Sanak Sanandan Sanatana Sanat Kumara as well,
Right.
but they have them as disciples of Dakshinamurti. So when you look at the people who claim their lineage back to the Sanakadi rishis, they all tend to be more renunciate folk.
Yeah. I mean, these four young boys were renunciates, right? I mean,
Yes.
or they're not young boys; they just have the appearance of young boys,
Right.
Which is an interesting story in and of itself.
Yeah.
But okay, so he takes this Sampradaya path. What do we know about his life?
What do we know about his life? We know that he traveled extensively in Bharat. We know that there were a few incidents of record in Tiruvananthapuram and also in Gujarat.
Uh-huh.
Where exactly those incidents took place, we do not know. But we do know that he was born in a place near Vedurya, what was called Vedurya Pattanam, which is now Mungipethan, in what is now Maharashtra.
Okay.
And so he lives there for a while with his family, and then in his youth they migrate up to Braj. So specifically, what is now known as Nimbark Ashram or Sudarshan Ashram, there are many names for it.
Mm-hmm.
We call it Nimbagram in Sanskrit or Nimgaon in Braj Bhasha.
Yeah.
It is right between Govardhan and Barsana.
Okay.
So for him, that is an opportune place. And he uses that as his base, but he goes around, as I said, the entire country. Some of the stories have him going as far as Assam and inspiring people over there with Vaishnav Dharma. So you've got him going around quite a few places.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, because it's always tough to talk about. I mean, I feel like Nimbarka and even Vallabhacharya don't have much of a historical story to tell. Their message is much more focused on their message as opposed to what their life was like. Because I've been trying to find more history as to Nimbarka and like his life, and like for example, we have Ramanuja's story or Shankara's. We have pretty. Right. I'm not saying these are facts. We have as a story about their entire lives.
Correct.
And I think with Nimbarka, there's not that much about him.
There's one source we have for him. It's called the Nimbarka Vikranti. With regards to your point of Vallabhacharya is very well known.
Okay, he is.
Down. His dates are down.
His dates for sure, yes.
Yeah. And what he did in between. They have the tradition of 84 Baithaks, or places that he sat and taught.
Okay.
Across India. And so that's very well researched. And again, because they're a regal tradition that had very close ties to royal families.
Yes.
Their history has survived a lot more intact. It's more accessible in Braj Bhasha and Gujarati language because a lot more of the people who follow that tradition are over in Gujarat. With regards to Nimbark Bhagwan, because nobody had actually translated the Nimbarka Vikranti until 50 years ago.
Wow.
Most people didn't know about the history. Most people didn't know that the book existed. And then I gave an abridgment in Hinduism Today special that the Shaiva monks in Hawaii invited me to write. And you do get a sense of someone who, obviously, followers of Nimbark Bhagwan ascribe him to be the Sudarshan Chakra avatar.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Sudarshana symbolism in all of his stories.
Yeah.
But we have a fairly good idea of where he went. He went all the way down to Tamraparni. He went down to Padmanabha Swami for his darshan. He went over to Dwarka. He was all the way up in the mountains in Himalaya. So if you see, his kind of life story mirrors a lot of the aspirations we would have for acharyas of that caliber.
Sure. Wow. What was his philosophy? What is Veda Abeda or Dvaita Advaita?
This is always the tricky one.
Yeah.
If you read Hajime Nakamura, who was instrumental in putting a date on Shankaracharyaji's life, and analyzing also the pre-Shankara Vedantins.
Yeah, I have his books, the pre-Shankara. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Great. Some really good research there.
Yeah.
What he says and what Fasheng says, what other observers have said of the Vedanta tradition is that at its core, it is a Bheda tradition.
Yeah.
And it took Shankaracharya to give it an Advaita Vedanta perspective. Mm-hmm. And that too obviously has its roots, but he really crystallized it in a certain way.
Yeah.
If you read Shankaracharya, you will see that he has, as Purva Paksha, quite often Swabhavik Bheda Bheda or Swabhavik Dvaita Dvaita.
Yeah.
And if you look at his Brihadaranyaka Bhashya,
Commentary. Yeah.
his commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, he rails at people from the Swabhavik Bheda Bheda tradition.
Yeah.
And that's for no other reason than we are very close in terms of not only practice, but worldviews too.
Yeah.
The Advaita part of Bheda Bheda is never denied.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The part that is a trouble for people who are only on Advaita is where we say that whilst we recognize everything is one in substance,
Yeah.
in terms of the time that we're in, there is definitely a difference.
Okay.
Right? All of that dissolves at a point, but then it reappears from that same point with the same kind of differences. Again, as we know that the cycle of samsara is eternal, that means there's no creator. If you're dealing with Brahman, you're dealing with a source that has all of this stuff within it and everything else.
Right.
Right. So Bheda Bheda, recognizing that there is an innate, natural connection of unity and difference, that is Swabhavik Bheda Bheda. Knowing that that exists, what do you do with that knowledge? The entire point of Vedanta is to help people meditate.
Yes.
In order not only to solve themselves, but to solve how they deal and interact with people so that they can too be liberated
right.
from suffering. And I like how a few of the scholars are reminding us that the translation of dukkha is not only suffering or sorrow, but also discontent and dissatisfaction. So if you're delivering yourself from that, is a good idea. By meditating on Brahman, okay, great. Tell me more about this Brahman, the Brahma Sutras. Okay, great, but still there's nothing, concrete I can focus on. So help me focus on this. Well, then the Upanishads do the entire thing where they're equating Brahman with symbols. So we can try and focus on those symbols. Nimbark Bhagwan's innovation was to use love as a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're using love, you can say, oh, well, I can meditate on my mother because, she loved me and she's a good enough symbol for Brahman. Yeah. That's true. But then you also get to the parts where you're thinking of her and you're going to remember those times when she had to chastise you or scold you. And so that doesn't hold as a good enough symbol for Brahman. But what held for Nimbark Bhagwan was listening to the poetry that came to his ears at that point in time. And in the poetry, in the Prakrit language poetry, you have a lot of Radha Krishna stuff. Radha Krishna poetry goes back as far as Hara's Gaha Saptasai. So King Hala's Gatha Saptashati in Sanskrit is Gaha Saptasai in Prakrit. And that poetry comes from like the 3rd century BC.
Oh, really?
So there are some poems from that kind of time, although we think that the compendium probably happened around the 1st century BC. So hearing about Radha Krishna, what he said is that Parabrahman for us is Parabrahman.
Yeah.
But if it makes it easier for you to meditate, Bhakte Chayopata Suchinte Vigrahad, if you want it to become a little bit more easy to meditate upon, here is Radha and Krishna. They are together Parabrahman. So Nimbark Bhagwan is not usually remembered for his Vedantic point of view, but because Radha Krishna Upasana has been taken up by many different traditions, when you look for the origin of that, it's him. Yeah. I'll give you another fun fact. Sri Ramanuja and Sri Madhvacharya, whilst writing their Brahma Sutras, never referred to, or their commentaries never referred to Parabrahman as Krishna.
No.
Nimbark Bhagwan did.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
But for Ramanuja, it was all Narayana, right?
It was all Narayana.
Yeah.
And so for Nimbark Bhagwan, you could also say that he's the first person to bring Krishna into the Parabrahman League in Vedantic discussions. Obviously, that's happened in the Bhagavad Gita before. We have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But to actually talk about Krishna as Parabrahman,
right,
with the full force of Vedanta behind it, that would be him.
Okay. Yeah. So so there's a lot of threads here because I find, first of all, the history from a perspective. So I hope you don't take any of my questions the wrong way. And I've always wondered, for example, Radha, right? So the Radha, the first recognition that I have of her actually being explicitly spoken about was not even in the Bhagavatam where you think you find her, but you don't. You find an off stanza in which they connect to Radha about that particular gopi that was very
correct,
special to Krishna. Now,
Correct.
the first recognition that I have, and this is new, something new that I didn't know before, that you just brought out, was the Gita Govinda is the first real kind of deeper interaction. I know there's other texts that, like
Right.
Brahma,
Brahma
Hare Krishna,
Purana.
yeah, Brahmavarta Purana, and then there's another text that Narada something sutras. I haven't read either of those, so but I know those two texts indicate Radha as a supreme being along with Krishna. So you're telling me there's texts that came well before that in
well
the
before
Prakrit?
that.
Okay.
Well before that. Who has listed them? I think Valerie Stoker had listed them. I've listed them in my PhD.
Wow.
These sources are the sources that, and so this is another point to contend with. I'm going to say it. You might get hate. I might get a lot of hate. When we are dealing with the longevity of traditions in ancient India, because we have studied through the colonial lens, we looked for texts only and evidences, material evidence of traditions to point to their longevity.
Yeah.
When we read, for example, the Agama Dambara of Jayanta Bhatta, the famous Nyayaka, and he's talking about contemporary Kashmir in the 11th century, in the 1000s, in Kashmir. He has a very famous little dialogue about how some Mimamsa Brahmins are complaining bitterly about the Vaishnava heathens who are taking on our symbols of the Sikha and the Sutra and the Tilaka. They're pretending as if they're Brahmins and they're walking around gaining the favor of the queen.
Yeah.
That is in Agama Dambara. And I'd like to remind people that Vaishnava Dharma originally is not a Vedic Dharma.
No.
It becomes Vedic due to the work of these acharyas who are trying to help Vedic society and ancient society both coalesce and live in the same place, knowing that there are a lot more commonalities than differences, right? So one of the things that lives in the ancient memory of ancient India is Radha and Krishna's relationship. That's old. How do you know it's old? Because Halas Gahasatasai has it, and a lot of poetry from during the Gupta era also refers back to Radha, Radhika, Radha, Radhika, Radha. Both names are used interchangeably. Another name that is used interchangeably is Gopijana.
Gopijana,
which is literally that Gopi girl.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So these traditions exist. We know how things coalesce. We know that the story of baby Krishna and young Krishna comes to us through the Harivamsha.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not in the Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, we hear of the King Krishna.
Yeah, yeah. Which, by the way, I love the way they do that in the Mahabharata, because, like, in the entire text, you're always you're circumspect about Krishna, who he is, like, and then he reveals it throughout. But the Harivamsha, the Kila that's added on at the end, expounds on his backstory, which is fantastic. I mean, there's allusions in the Mahabharata to the Harivamsha.
Correct.
And even Vishnu Purana has the baby Krishna in some sense, but not really. And then you really get that in the Bhagavatam, where it's like really like played upon. Yeah.
So we need to see these texts not as evidence of linear progression, but as evidence of confluences of numerous streams of people and their own beliefs of who Vasudeva was.
Right.
Vasudeva being across the entire continent in some form or another. That's something we see now, but what it meant back then was that there was a Vasudeva-esque character that each of these tribes of our ancestors used to follow.
Right.
And so one of those streams includes the Radha Krishna stuff.
Okay.
So when you pull those together now, you have the Vasudeva who is the king, you have the Vasudeva who is the kid over in Gokul, you have the Vasudeva who will save you because he's Parabrahman, he will save you because he's Ishvara. But he's also the object of all meditation because he's Parabrahman.
Yeah.
Now, by the time Nimbar Bhagwan gets all of this material, he's now just 50 years shy of Shankaracharya's birth. It's now a time when he writes that Parabrahman is symbolized by love. That is the most pure you can go, unconditional love. And if you're looking for that symbol of what unconditional love looks like, you must look to Radha and Krishna, who are not two separate beings, but the same being in two different forms.
Interesting. I mean, because it's fascinating. in a similar way, obviously Ramanuja's tradition is the Ubaya Vedanta, where he has the Alvar tradition, which is very vernacular and separate from the Vedic tradition in some sense. And then so Nimbarka in some sense is also doing something similar.
Very similar, just with a different folklore. So instead of the ancient Tamil folklore, in this case they're using the ancient Prakrit folklore.
So so now we have these major Sanskrit texts, like we have the Mahabharata, which Nimbarka obviously probably knew inside out.
He knew, yeah.
And Vishnu Purana and these other texts. What does he see as the role of someone like Rukmini or Rukmini compared to Radha, or Sita compared to Radha? Because in most of iconography, Lakshmi and Vishnu are associated, and in the Vishnu Purana, Vishnu says, Prasha says, when you are born as man, she is born as woman, connecting Vishnu and Lakshmi in every avatar. And so, what is the relationship between Radha and then Lakshmi?
So Nimbar Bhagwan points us to Shrishchate Lakshmi's Chapatnya.
Yeah.
So there are two. Sri
that's
and Lakshmi. So whenever we hear Sri Hari, we've already seen Radha Krishna.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because Sri is Radha, Lakshmi is Sita, Rukmini, etc.
Yeah.
And you can tell that people in our tradition had troubles dealing with this new theology.
Yeah.
Because only 3 guru generations down from him, you get Purushottamacharya. And Purushottamacharya says, he actually means Rukmini, so don't understand it as anything else. But just in case, there is this person named Radha.
Within the tradition itself, there's this...
Within the tradition itself. The actual tradition, to be frank, the Bhagavata is not considered a pramana in the tradition until the 1500s.
Wow. Well, that's also probably because the Bhagavata wasn't fully formed in the way that we have it today.
Correct, but we also have, authors were writing around the 12th century. We have their texts that survive, and even then they've not accepted it.
Was Vishnu Purana?
Vishnu Purana was definitely accepted. You have the Mahabharata, the traditional lot.
Yeah.
But when it comes to his super, sudden kind of explosion of this Radha Krishna as Parabrahman, it's like, okay, so where's the proof? He doesn't give you any proof.
Interesting.
Why should you have to prove that Radha Krishna, who the entire population of that area remembered in such loving ways, whenever they would think of Radha Krishna, their minds would just float off into this beautiful realm of peace, no matter what was going on around them.
Right.
That was where it was. But I will say this very clearly. For him, that was the most intimate, secret, private kind of meditation.
Right.
For him, people should start with Parabrahman and end with Parabrahman. But you can go to it through his ideal method was you start as a student of Vedanta. If you find Vedanta too much trouble, you can do what is called Sharanagati or Prapatti. Surrender yourself to Bhagavan, and who you would surrender yourself to was as Ramakanta Purushottama, which is now Lakshmi Narayana. Right? So you can surrender yourself to Narayana, Lakshmi Narayana. If you have trouble surrendering yourself to Lakshmi Narayana, knowing that the rules of sadhana bhakti are very, very, very subtle and all-encompassing, then you can resort to your guru, and your guru will try and formulate something that will work for you. But those who have gone beyond all of these, they might relish the symbol of love. And if they're looking for the best symbol of love, then for them, within the bounds of the initiated, then Radha Krishna would be there for them. Otherwise, it is Lakshmi Narayana, and otherwise it is Parabrahman.
Okay, very, very fascinating. I'm gonna probe some deeper here. What is the nature in the relationship between Vishnu or Narayana and Krishna in this, right? Because is he avatara, or is the source of the avatars?
Number one, they're both the same. Number two, Vasudeva is the one that we're looking for.
Pancharatra is where we're going with this, right?
Pancharatra being one of the older bros that were around at the time.
That's right. Because Pancharatra and Sue.
Right. Also knowing that Pancharatra is heavily Narayana-centric as well by the time it gets digested by the Brahmana literature. But in referring to Bhagavan Krishna, the word avatari is always used.
It is used with metric.
Yeah, so avatari, the source of all avatars,
okay,
is always used with regard to him. And I think the great thing about the Nimbark Sampradaya is it is open to your particular point on the spectrum. Whether that spectrum is Parabrahman, all the way through Lakshminarayana, all the way through to Radha Krishna, even in the Middle Ages, Sita Rama, and in even more places, even Uma Maheshwari, Shiva Parvati, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think that leeway comes because we're not really concerned too much about the symbol.
I see.
But we are concerned about the tattva, which is Parabrahman.
Yes.
So we will spend a lot of time trying to discern what Parabrahman is and what Parabrahman means for us.
Yeah.
But if we want to go down the devotional route to establish, a more emotional relationship with Parabrahman, then we will try and help you through discerning what symbol is going to be best for you.
So within the Barka tradition, you can do Shiva and Uma together as your I guess Ishvara in that sense, right?
It's a lot less common because all of the teachers in the tradition are more focused on Narayana universe, kind of.
Yeah.
But there are a good number as well that do focus on Bhagavan Shankar and Bhagavati Parvati.
That's good. I mean, that's something I think that I find lacking within the Sri Vaishnava tradition. It's in some sense very insulated, just to Vishnu-centric everything, which, in some sense is okay, but I also find it that takes away from its universality application. But in the Nimbarka tradition also, so is there... Krishna becomes the source of the avatars, including Vishnu? Or, I mean, I know they're one of the same, and that's always a difficult question because it's very similar to Jiva, Brahman, and that's in some sense, right? Because Nimbarka uses, last I recall, he uses a lot, which I find the analogy interesting, of the snake and the coil. I remember, so he was one of the few that I saw that used that much more than like the typical, the sun and the rays. And
correct.
So he was very particular with that analogy.
Yes.
So can you kind of go into that if you?
So his use of Ahikundla, that lovely sutra in the Brahma Sutras, interpreted in various ways.
Yeah.
He said the apparition, the appearance, nonetheless inspires the same kind of emotions within you.
Yeah.
Right. Just because it appears as a rope.
Yeah.
Right. You will think it's a rope and you will go to it and you will try to hold it. When you see it's a snake, you'll be scared out of your skin. But in both situations, the reality of what you're feeling is not lost.
Yeah.
Right. The misapprehension of something, we are more focused on the fact that Brahma Parinamavada is our central thesis.
Yes.
That Parabrahman transforms into everything that's here. So it's not about illusion. It's not about that it's only one.
Yeah.
We say that yes, it's only one, but it's because the one has transformed into everything that's here.
So when you say transformed in the sense, like, so what is the nature of difference and similarity between Brahman, Jagat, Brahman?
It's a very interesting one because I was reading up about what Shankaracharya was saying about, Swabhavik Bheda. His central thing was that the Nyaya says you cannot have two opposite issues or two opposite realities existing in the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Nimbark Bhagwan says, why not?
which is a legit point, right? The law of excluded middle doesn't need to be applied.
Right. So he lives into all of that, and his interpretations of the Bheda Vakyas in the Upanishad and the Abheda Vakyas are always pulled by this central theory, which is you can have both options in the same substratum.
Right. At the same time.
At the same time.
Okay.
At the same time. And you'll ask him, well, how is that possible? You can use something very similar to the notion of the wife that sat between her daughter and her husband.
Right.
She's different to the daughter and to the husband.
Yeah.
But she's doing so at the same time.
Yeah. No, I mean, because what's interesting is, so you end up having the Chaitanya Sampradaya using achintya to explain that difference, right? And then actually Shankara does the same thing with his concept of Maya or avidya. It's both real and unreal, right? It's in between. So the same concept can be applied to that, but it's so. But what is so what would be the nature of the difference and similarity? Is it qualitative, quantitative? What would differentiate the jiva from Brahman, and what would make him similar, or him and her? Well, him and her doesn't apply, but yes.
Right. Time is the one that causes the difference.
Yeah.
And once time ceases to exist, difference ceases to exist. But knowing that time never really truly ceases to exist because everything exists forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know how that story is going to go. You would go into regressus ad infinitum with that logic, but it is a sound logic in the sense that if the cycles of emanation and dissolution are eternal, then there's never going to be an original point.
Yeah. I agree there. But for example, so say moksha occurs, or is the individual atma merged and obliterated, or does it still maintain some sort of existence? Now, So
this one is the one I would draw in the experience of the other sampradayas as well, in as much as the spectrum is being validated here.
Yeah,
moksha is the goal, right? Whatever it is, moksha is the goal.
But actually, most people, many of the acharyas say that even that's not the goal, right? The goal isn't a moksha; it's the loving connection to Bhagavan constantly.
Well, see here. What Srinivasa Acharya says right at the beginning of his sutras on his commentary to Brahma Sutras is that there are certain paryayavachi words that we should understand not as being different, synonyms, that may have been described as if they're referring to different theories, but actually refer to the same thing.
Okay.
So one of the straight away, he goes right off the deep end with nididhyasana, manana, dhyana, samadhi, and parabhakti. Those 5.
Yeah, they're all the same.
He says they're all the same.
Okay.
Because in all of those states, the state that is elicited is one of complete uninterrupted focus on, an absorptive focus on that Parabrahman, that Param Tattva.
Yeah.
Now, the devotee person would attain to that state in which they are now merged into the same abode of Radha Krishna, and they would exist there in perpetual bliss, witnessing the various leelas of Radha Krishna.
Right.
But that is no different than saying that the person is absorbed completely in Parabrahman.
Right. I think this is more of like a visual component that messes with us more than the conceptual, right? It's like, oh, we're watching it as opposed to being there. It feels different in our heads, but the feeling would still be the same. The feeling
would still be the same. Look, the semantic difference is something that we've been pointed out again when Bhagavan says, yamimam pushpitam vacham pravadanti vipashita, this whole notion that beware of flowery language.
Yeah.
Right? And then you get the whole teaching in the Chandogya Upanishad between Udalaka Aruni and Shvetaketu. And he's saying, just by learning that this is made of iron, everything that's made of iron is known.
Yes.
Right? What is everything else? Everything else is just a nama arambanam, vikaru namadeyam. It's just a name
Amarupa.
that is, yes,
it's
just allotted by consent, conventional knowledge to something. In the same way, we need to take a stock of how we think of moksha. Are we going to put in all of these are we going to concretize these meanings? Where the acharyas were more open in helping people wherever they were at.
Right. Because it's like that saying, what's it? Ano badram nivartante aprapya manasa saha, right? Where
yato vacha
nivartante.
Yes.
Yeah. Where the mind goes, where speech goes, mind cannot follow, or something of that nature.
Yeah.
I forget.
Words return.
Words return, the mind cannot go.
Yes.
Yeah. So
having not been able to understand what has gone on there. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I think, like when we talk about things like moksha, we can't really talk about them. It's this experience that you just kind of have to let be. And in the same way, like most of the acharyas even talk about the nature of this of Brahman is some sense, it's like looking at the moon. You can only point through something else. You can't directly show them the moon, right? Or
Correct.
explain it. So to me, this is always a difficulty when we get into these like really deep elements, but I love it. I love learning what these differences, because your explanation here gives a much more open end than many other people would say about what the nature of moksha would be.
I see. And I mean, it comes into real force during tumultuous times.
Yeah.
Because at that moment, you can help people no matter what their prior beliefs were.
Yeah.
And without changing them. This is not a proselytizing organization. This is literally dudes in dreadlocks out in the forest.
That's right.
And by that very same token, not only dudes but also ladies out in the forest, in their own ashrams, all there just to help people. Yeah.
So in the Nimbarka Sampradaya, I mean, I don't want to gloss over these philosophical things, and I don't know how much our viewers actually understand this, but I think it's fascinating to know. What is the role of Radha and Krishna within the Sampradaya? I mean, is it similar to? I know they're one, but do they have separate roles in terms of sadhana or in terms of ultimate? Like, can you only get moksha by going through Radha, or they have those kind of situations like we have in some forms of Sri Vaishnavism, where Lakshmi becomes the way to get moksha, the only way to get moksha. So what's Radha's role within the theology here?
As time has gone on, people have introduced different ways of thinking about it. But as far as Nimbarka Bhagwan was concerned, the two are one and the same.
Yeah.
And so the path to moksha, which is Bhagavad Bhavapatti Lakshana Moksha, which is attaining the same state as Parabrahman.
Yeah.
That is completely attainable through any of those methods I described before. And so if there is that much leeway, then there is going to be the leeway that is allotted to or commensurate with one's own bhakti rasa, whichever flavor of bhakti that they're more used to imbibing, that way. Yeah. Later on, obviously, we get a situation where the kings move into Vrindavan. Mm-hmm. And as the kings come into Vrindavan, everything starts to change again, where there's more emphasis on Radha only, or more emphasis only on Krishna. And then, because Radha is never his wife and we're very, very Vedic, we must focus on Radha, Krishna and Rukmini. And, we don't care about those things. It's love that's supreme. Well, then we're back to Radha and Krishna again. There's a whole kind of gamut, a universe of thought on it. And my Guruji's Guru, I asked him the question, what's the right way? And he says, you know what? Go back to what Nimbarka Bhagwan said, whatever makes your meditation easy. What is the sara of that statement? Whatever makes your meditation easy means meditate. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So whatever, there's yena kena prakarana, whatever way it is, just get to a state where you're on an uninterrupted stream of meditation.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So what was Nimbarka Sampradaya's relationship to things like the role of women, the role of other communities like Jatis, Varnas, whatever? I mean, how did they interact with that? Was it a very Brahminical, or was it?
Right. This colonial mindset I was talking about, where we're looking only to texts. Yeah. If we are colonialists, we will refuse to understand that a person might write something and do something different.
Right.
For example, the stumbling block that everybody throws at Vedanta is the Apashudra Adhikarana of the Brahma Sutras, right? We completely forget and always marginalize the fact that when writing as Vaishnavas, we are already considered by the majority tradition to be outsiders. And so you must, things that are considered sacrosanct within somebody's society, such as by that time it was the Jati system. By that time, what was Jati was a big concern for the empires of the day, whether it be the Guptas or those around the other parts of the country. People were preoccupied with that because it was a central way to ensure that your state would function correctly.
Right.
So when they're writing, they're going to say something that would make the people who are reading think that these guys are okay. They're part of us too.
Yeah.
How many people read?
Not many at all. Tiny population.
Right. So when Ramanuja has Kanchipurana as a guru, when the Arvas consist of people from across the sections of society,
Yeah.
when Prakrit Bhasha is not spoken by what you call traditional upper castes,
Mhm.
if that's what you're going to use, or the higher jatis, you've got to understand there that our acharyas are living in two different worlds at the same time.
Right.
Nimbar Bhagwan, for his part, because the only parts of his writings that we have available to us are the Brahma Sutras and a few stotrams here and there.
Mhm.
You can see that in the devotional stotrams, he's a lot more, he's talking in universalist terms.
Mhm.
When he's writing in the Brahma Sutra, you see that he's following convention.
Right.
The same thing with Ramanuja.
Right.
Sri Ramanujacharya follows convention when he has to write conventionally, but he acts universally when he is free to be himself, which is in his day-to-day life.
Right.
Same thing with Shankara and the Chandala episode.
Yeah.
Right? So bhakti is that one tradition that, because it has grown from the soil in recognition of everything, like really you can taste the flavor of the land of the ancients.
Yeah.
Through bhakti, especially the universalist kinds. You will see that women have equal space to men in the older versions of this. After obviously empire gets through with us, we've got a different way of being.
Absolutely.
But even then, some of the most famous sadhvis of our tradition have been obviously sadhvis. So the most famous, such a difficult thing to draw this line between English and
It is. It's so hard, right? Because it's inherent in the word itself, sadhvi.
Exactly.
You don't need to say woman anymore.
You don't need to say that there were sadhus and sadhvis. That's it. You know? And even now in Vrindavan, the vast majority of Nimbarkis who are practitioners who live in the old ways are sadhvis. There are a few sadhus, but there are also a good number of sadhvis.
Now, do these sadhvis also take very similar vows like yourself?
Oh yeah, they take the same vows. They teach other women. They teach men in some cases as well. So
Yeah.
It's not the case that these are women only for women, and men are only for men. But both genders are looking for, and all three genders rather, are looking for people who have taken the vow of renunciation seriously.
Okay.
And then it doesn't matter who you are; you can teach them.
Now, what's the relationship between the Grihastha ashrama and the sannyasa? Is it within the Nimbarka Sampradaya? Is it at odds with each other? Is it because some sampradayas require some sort of sannyasa for even the connection to moksha?
Moksha is available to everybody.
Okay.
So for us, the sannyasa portion of this is for those who want to become teachers, those who wish to preserve the teachings, live the teachings, and disseminate the teachings. Rather preserve. I don't like the word disseminate the teachings.
Yeah.
So preserving the teachings. When it comes to the Grihastha life, Grihasthas can achieve moksha through their own practices at home, and all of those have been outlined in the tradition. Nowadays, those who want to stay in the Grihastha line but also teach, those are known as pandits or acharyas. So the panditas tend to be those who are famous kathavachaks are also in this mix.
Yeah.
But the real sampradaya lives with the renunciate sadhus and sadhvis.
Okay.
And even amongst the sadhus and sadhvis, I would say would live with those who are more content living the old way, in the jhopris, in the kutirs, rather than in brick and mortar monasteries.
Okay. Now, along with this, so is there anything unique in the practice of the Nimbarka Sampradaya that would distinguish it?
I forgot to mention. Yes.
Okay.
So one of the next major reasons that you don't hear of the Nimbarka Sampradaya, obviously, is because there is no big temple connected with us.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's because the old way of being a muni, where are you going to find resources to have a temple? More importantly, if you're part of an ancient tradition, you're going to follow the ancient ways of doing things.
Right.
Ancient ways of doing things were shaligrama or shivalinga, right? If you're on the Shaiva or Vaishnava path. Absolutely. And Shakta has always been a lot more adaptable.
Yeah.
And with regards to us, we had, the tradition is that Sanakadik Muni gave Narad Muni a shalagram, a special shalagram, which we refer to as Sarveshwar Bhagavan. And that shalagrama was passed on to Nimbar Bhagavan. That shalagrama was passed on to his disciple, etc., etc. So currently it is still being worshipped in the tradition. But because the Acharya would be moving,
Uh-huh.
For example, Nimbar Bhagwan would do the morning seva, put the shaligrama on his throat,
Wow.
walk around. When it was time for Sandhyan Puja, he would stop. They would do the puja, would offer food, share food with everybody else, and then, time to move again, back in the throat, and off he goes. So that Sarveshwar Bhagwan has been what we've focused on. And in Vrindavana, this might get a little bit touchy for a few people as well, but
sure.
Being in Vrindavana as long as we have, we actually never stayed in Vrindavana. We lived in Mathura or in Nimbagram and would walk to Vrindavana, would do our sadhana in Vrindavana, and then would come out of Vrindavana before evening time, because we would never want to dirty Vrindavana. For us, that was the pristine temple. The jungles of Vrindavana was the most divine temple on this planet.
Right.
There was no need for physical temples.
Interesting.
But obviously, 1515, you get the first people who come in that are used to having temples.
Yeah.
In Orissa is a huge Jagannath temple. That temple has been there forever. So when people who are used to those kinds of temples come to Vrindavan, Vrindavan looks like this poor, dilapidated, undiscovered place.
Right.
When in fact it was a place, as the Meghaduta reminds us, it is a place where people have been going to sing.
Yeah.
So I would say that is a very big defining feature of our tradition.
Okay.
You go to Vrindavan today and you'll say, well, if Nimbarkis were there, why aren't there Nimbarki buildings around? Right?
Yeah.
Very easy answer. The 1500s, those big temples that you see in Vrindavan that survived from that time were founded by Chaitanya's followers who used king's grants to build them.
Yeah.
Whereas all we had in those areas were a few jhoparis.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And those are ancient places, but they were nonetheless natural places. In 1757, when Abd Ali Shah Durrani comes through and massacres everybody on the day of Holi, in Vrindavan, his chroniclers record, they gave a quarter silver penny to the soldiers if they killed a man, a full silver if they killed a woman, but they gave 5 silver pennies to the person who, having cut off the head of an infidel, tied it to a cow and threw it into a burning temple, their burning dwelling. Oh, wow. Now, if you translate that back to what was actually there, you've got the sadhus and sadhvis and their jhoparis. So in 1757, we actually lose the vast majority of all of our manuscripts. We lose the vast majority of our sadhus who knew how to live like that. And if you ever have the time, you should read. There's a lovely lament of a different Sampradaya's sadhu who was watching the entire thing. He actually heard that they were coming the night before and ran away. But one of his friends was a very famous poet called Ghanananda or Anandagana.
Okay.
Anandagana, he really cries. This is, the author is called Chacha Hit Vrindavan Das, part of the Hita tradition. And he writes something called Harikala Beli, the creeper of the activities of Hari. And his basic thing was that, how dare you, Krishna, let your people suffer in this way? Yeah. Whilst being, really, really devoted to Bhagavan Krishna at the same time. And he writes, I didn't even have the kind of faith in me that Anandagana had when faced by the overlords. He said, cut my body so that my blood mixes back in with the soil of Vrindavana. Wow. Right? Wow. So all of those wonderful people of that time, all of that knowledge that we've had in our traditions now, it's quite unfortunate in 2020 that I'm sat here with the remnants of our tradition. Yeah. That's, I think, what defines us. The fact that we're peripheral to start with, that there were quite difficult things happened to our tradition in the interim, and now that today we're quite small. We're quite small. But
I mean, the size doesn't matter. It's about the message and the. So another tough question to ask, and this I think is problematic amongst all the Vedanta Sampradayas, is especially within the renunciate order, the sannyasi order. It's very Brahmanized. I have not, to my knowledge, seen any one of the mattas anywhere have any significant non-Brahmin presence. It's all the people there. Like, even though the order is supposed to be, when you become a sannyasi, caste doesn't matter, jati, Varna, none of that matters to you anymore. It's still there. Like, you still see it all, like even all the Shankaracharyas are all somehow Brahmins. All the Ramanujacharya Matas are Brahmins. Madhvacharya, everyone I see is Brahmins. Is that the same within the Nimbarka tradition currently? And if it is, what is it we can do as people, that care about these sampradayas, that care about the messages, care about our traditions, to really try to universalize it the best we can? Because that's what I think the intent of these of our founders were. Is this shouldn't just be a place for a particular jati or varna.
Correct. So remember how I spoke about the fact that the convention had to be maintained if you were not going to be exiled from a kingdom?
Yeah.
So you'll get a lot of, even the tantras are referring to, come on, man, the tantras are not Vedic. We know this. We know it, right? And for the tantras to be calling for a guru to be Brahmana, right? You've got to understand what they mean by that.
Yeah.
If you're calling for your guru to be Brahmin, it means to be acceptable to Brahmin people.
Yes.
Right? So that when you're having debates with them, they will not point to you as being from a non-Vedic tradition.
Yeah.
And not even bother to listen to you.
Yeah.
So while you might find that as in scriptural exhortations, the lived life of an Nimbarki sadhu is that you'll find lots of the Nimbarki sadhus and sadhvis are non-Brahmin by birth.
Okay.
And I've only found that when I've pressed them and pressed them and pressed them to tell me about their former lives. None of them take the rule about disclosing your former life. They don't take it with a pinch of salt. They take that as stock. So they will refuse to tell us that they don't come from this tradition or from this family or that family. And you might say, well, they're just probably trying to preserve their image as Brahmins.
Yeah.
And they'll say, absolutely not. We're not Brahmins. We're not Vaishyas. We're not Shudras. We're not this. We're not that. We're not the other. We are Vaishnav.
Yeah.
And Vaishnav from its inception has always declared that everything else is subservient.
Yeah.
As an identity.
Yeah.
All other identities do not matter. The one that matters is your connection with your Parabrahman.
Yes.
So whether you're Shaiva, or whether you're Shakta, whether you're Smarta, whether you're Vaishnava, or whether you're other traditions, that's the identity you should cling to, not this nonsense social constructed identity.
Right.
So at this moment in time, there are a good number of people who are Brahmin in the tradition, but there are equal, if not more, who are non-Brahmin.
Okay.
And you might answer, well, why is there a high preponderance of Brahmins? If you follow the demographics of these families since independence, you will know that the poorest people who have an inclination towards spiritual life come from Brahmin families.
Sure.
And so those people know that they're going to be able to get something to eat, place to stay, if they follow their or rather lean back on their spiritual pathway.
Right.
Whereas those who are from non-Brahmin traditions, non-Brahmin families, they know that there are other things open to them.
Sure. Yeah. I have more questions. Do you have more time, or are you running out?
Where are we now?
We're at 8:40.
8:40. Okay, I have until the hour.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, I'm loving learning about the tradition. I'm loving learning about all of the history and diversity within, Nimbarka. But now let's get back to the switch gears a little bit and go back to your life right now as a chaplain within Georgetown. So coming from your tradition where you aren't state-sponsored or affiliated with wealthy merchants and things of that nature, how does it feel to suddenly have your sense more to a location and more to a particular people? Does it feel a little burdensome to you, or does it feel like it's difficult?
It is a little difficult, and I suppose it's because the soul of somebody who's been wandering around for so long will never want to stay put. But that too is good training. We should be doing Chaturmasya at the moment. So stopping the wandering around and staying in one place is a good thing for this moment in time. Georgetown brings with it its own set of complexities. Being a university in Washington, D.C., that location, the general geography of the place informs its day-to-day reality.
Yeah, I'm sure you have lunch with Trump every day, and
I will forever be grateful that I need to take my lunch on my own. But seriously, it's an interesting challenge. I've learned a lot from being at Georgetown.
Yeah.
I've learned what it means to really have the support of your tradition through legislation, through
Sure.
Grants and stipends and scholarships and all of those things, and see what it means when you don't have those things.
Right.
It's also very interesting to see how those quote unquote material advantages
Right.
affect your perceptions of your morals,
Right.
your Vedantic ethics. And so while at some point I will lament very long about the fact that our people don't understand what it means to support their society, to preserve their heritage, and what preserving heritage means for the future. It's not about preserving notions of, we belong to this great golden past.
Yeah.
That's nonsense. Only reason that we should preserve our heritage is because of the way that we think.
Yes.
The way that we think, this open to discussion, this pluralistic, we can deal with your multiplicity. We don't need you to conform to us. That kind of openness, that is what needs preserving. That is what our Native American friends are trying to preserve. That is what our Native African folks are trying to preserve. All of the native traditions across this earth are trying to preserve. Deal with diversity because that's natural.
Well, that is the state of existence, is diversity. And
so that is the only thing that we need to learn how to protect as people. And if we adopt ways that are similar or mirror the ways that are being taken by powerful society, we do ourselves and our history is an injustice that is so great that would actually erase us by our own selves.
Right. And I think this is, that message resonates with me, especially at this time in our history and not just America, but globally, right? We're becoming so bifurcated into two camps where you're either on one side that is pure and more moral than everyone else, or you're on the other side that is, the ones that want to change the world and you have to be with it or against this. It's just such a difficult place. I mean, we see this in the United States right now with this not only the purity of the left, but the rigidity of the right. And India has the same issues too. And this is, I think partially, a large part is due to the fact that we have adopted by and large a very Western framework of thought about what it means to have a functional society and a functional thought process. And like you said, Nimbarka's position of why can't we have both, right? At the same time, right? Why can't you have this, that, and everything else? Because that's what the Hindu or larger Dharmic tradition comes with, is this plurality is what is important, and maintaining that plurality via conversation, via debates, because and I think this is the beauty of even the Vedic tradition, as opposed to the Vaishnava and other traditions, is the value of the violence was seen as that has to be the last resort, which is why the Vedic tradition ends up even doing things of substituting animals certain things in for animals when they do a Vedic yajna. And they have large discussions in the Mimamsa tradition about what himsa is, violence, right? If violence is so central to all existence, how do we minimize it? And Bach becomes the way we minimize it, right? To speech.
That's very important.
And if we take that speech away, then violence is the only thing that's left.
Yes. Kumara Bhatt was great in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Very, very right. And what keeps me at Georgetown, and what has kept me at Georgetown to this date, has been the fact that Hindus in America are comparatively new to, say, Hindus in Europe.
Right.
Hindus have a great opportunity at defining their narrative.
Right.
Are we going to continue to assume that the issues of Indian society are the same as the issues of Hindu Dharma? Or are we going to be able to countenance the fact that we've got people from Bhutan, people from Nepal, people from Mauritius, Fiji, West Indies, South Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, etc. From the African continent, rather. You've got African American Hindus. You've got people from Bali who say, and I really have I use this as an example. You ask a Balinese person what they follow, they'll tell you it's Agama Shiva. If you ask a scholar what Balinese people follow, they'll say Hinduism. How do Balinese people follow Indianism?
Do they?
When they follow Agama Shiva.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Agama Shiva and Indianism are two different things.
Yeah, they're not the same at all.
They're not the same at all.
No.
And so when we are now in this seminal kind of, it is a watershed moment for Hindus in America. This moment has been had in the UK, and it's developed in a different way.
Yeah.
But I think that Hindus in America, if they really rely on two really main principles, number one, discussion.
Yeah.
And number two, Taittiriya Upanishad talks about finding a group of scholars and emulating the ones that are humble.
Yeah.
If they are confused as to way ahead, right?
Yeah.
That very important teaching for graduates that comes from the Taittiriya Upanishad was predicated on us having a sadas or a sabha or a parishada of learned people who could deal with these things.
Right.
We have lots of parishadas. We have lots of lots and lots of sabhas, but I don't know if you could call them all learned in the scriptures. And even if they are learned in the scriptures, do they follow that seminal quality that the Upanishad is asking us for? Are they humble?
Yeah.
If Americans can formulate those people and listen to them a little bit, I think American Hindus will have a chance.
I hope you're right, because I struggle with American Hindus a lot. I grew up in this country. I have met thousands of Indian people, Hindus, and I can probably count on my two hands how many people have a sense of these traditions, or even a sense of what it means to be Hindu outside of identity, right? Like, I'm not very concerned with identity. I don't care about whether you identify as Hindu or not. That to me is secondary. My thing is, do you care about these ideas? Do you care about the way people think? Or do you care about these traditions? And I find that to be, sadly, a little less than what I would want. It's and I think even in this day and age, you probably see kids today much more than I do, like in their college coming to me to talk to you about Hinduism. And I don't know how, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, is there's a sense of being Hindu is so wrong in this day and age, in some sense. Because like when I grew up, being Hindu wasn't wrong. It was, I'm the only freaking brown guy. I'm not Christian. I wear a tilak going to school. My dad used to make me wear namam going to school. And
oh, wow.
I used to try to wipe it off, but there's residual left, and people would make fun of me. I was vegetarian. I was as different from, even I got picked on by black people, brown people, white people for being different. So for me, it was an issue of, I don't want to be different that way anymore. Now I love my difference, right? But today, this day and age, most Hindus are accepted in society. They're just there, right? There's like, you're not the only guy in school that's Hindu. You're multiple people. You go to temples. I find that they're so afraid of their tradition. They're so afraid of their culture. They're so afraid of anything outside of Bollywood that makes them look good. It's a little daunting to me. I feel what keeps Hinduism alive in America, to be honest, is immigrants coming from India, not so much people from here.
I'll give you a little bit of a hope.
Please.
I think that our the younger generation, because of how Black Lives Matter movement has been going and how issues have been raised, I think at Georgetown especially, number one, they started questioning their own histories through being at a Catholic university that is so openly Catholic.
Yeah.
And so if you're not going to Mass on Sunday, well, where are you going? Why aren't you going to Mass? Because I'm I don't believe in that. Well, what do you believe in? I don't know. My parents were Hindu, are Hindu. And so from that comes questions, and from that questions it comes the deepening.
Yeah.
Whether or not you choose to follow it, it is important to have awareness about it.
Sure.
Right. And our students, they definitely try to get awareness. I'm not saying all of them do. I know that
Right.
there are about 350 registered Hindus at Georgetown,
Right.
of whom I will see them all at Diwali.
Yeah.
But throughout the years, we have a sustained number of about 60 or so that come to our weekly aartis.
Yeah.
And for any of the bigger festivals like Garba, Navaratri, that's celebrated in the Gujarati style of Garba, we would have 100 or so people.
Sure.
When it's Holi, we also celebrate Vaisakhi near the time, because to celebrate Holi what it is probably when everything is iced over in DC. But you get everybody comes out to those things. So what we try to do is to say to people, look, read or listen to Chimamanda's talk. Chimamanda Adichie gave that lovely TED talk about the danger of a single story.
Yeah.
Try to realize that Hindus are not one people.
No.
We are not one people. You can talk about Hinduisms, in as much as that is a very poor replacement word for Vaishnava, Shaiv, Shakta, Smarta, regional traditions, and the post-1800s Sanatana Dharma movement.
Right.
That's what Hinduism is referring to, or trying to refer to quite badly. And if you have gotten to know a Vaishnava, you'll know that one person's Sita Rama is a bit different to another person's Radha Krishna.
Yeah.
Which is a bit different to another person's Lakshmi Narasimha.
Yeah.
So getting them to realize that there is a vast depth, it tends to do one of two things. Either it becomes something that's enthralling and they get into it there and then.
Right.
Or it becomes something that is really, really too big for them to get into now.
Yeah.
But because they know it's there, I do hear back from them once they've graduated, and students pick up their threads and they go and build a lovely fabric for themselves. So that's all that one can hope for. People are doing that. That's why you should be hopeful. There are a lot of people who are there with scissors to cut those threads, however.
Yes. Yeah.
And one need not mention who they are, but we should not be naive is another part of the story.
Yeah,
there is the goodwill of our people, and people who have similar mindsets to us, versus the really deep-pocketed, well politically supported movements of people who really can't countenance people who have different worldviews to them.
Right. And this is, obviously I have some sense of hope, because this is why I would do a podcast like this anyway, is I want people to learn more. And I assume that there's people out there that care about these traditions. But at the same point, it's important for me to have conversations with you and other people to talk about the social evils that are part and parcel of our great isms of Hinduism or Dharma or whatever it is, right? Because there is no necessarily right answer to everything. There's no Dharma is subtle, right? So it's we have to figure that out. But the only way we figure that out is we talk, we engage with each other. And I am hopeful that, at least if not amongst our own ethnic people, that Hinduism is becoming a little more, or various sampradayas becoming more open to other groups of people, other ethnic groups and other people that are interested in getting a different spirituality. And it's important, at the end of the day, like, with the work you're doing is amazing. It's fascinating. I don't know too many people that have the time, not the time, you don't have time, but have the desire, the drive, and the passion to work with, college students or young adults in trying to kind of guide them through some of these difficult times. Because it's a very unique thing, I think, to the dharmic way of approaching things. We're not used to this Western institution of college and this chaplaincy, right? That's not how it works, really. Right. Usually you go to a guru or acharya to learn a mantram or to do something related to practice, not so much about identity, not so much about these things which you're providing. So, thank you for that service you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you. All I would say is that if through your podcast people are discussing these kinds of things, I have even more hope than I had beforehand in that case.
Well, I don't have a huge following. I have maybe like 500, maybe max. I'm trying to build it, but I want more people to care about these things, because I think the intellectual tradition, like you were talking about today, Nimbarka, is a world intellectual tradition. You can sit up there with anyone like Spinoza or Kant, and you should be able to have conversations with people that have those perspectives, because it's a philosophy. It's not just a
philosophy. Yes, and I mean, the reason why America gave me hope in some cases when I went there.
Yeah.
In Edinburgh, when I was doing my PhD, we established the Edinburgh Hindu Temple, a temple that was mostly Punjabi people.
Yeah.
But because of, I'm this place in India, I'm from that place in India, the other place in India,
Yeah.
there were some really tight dynamics between people, really frictive dynamics between people. And when they opened and they were wondering about which deities that they should install, I said, we stick with the deities of the Shastra, but try and find a version of those deities that speak to broader people than just yourself.
Yeah.
And so now you go there, you'll have the Kannada community celebrating something, you'll have the Oriya community celebrating something, you'll have the Sri Lankan Tamil community celebrating something, you'll have the Nepalese community. It's a cross.
Yeah.
And then when I came over to DC, and you see the Sri Shiva Vishnu temple in Maryland, and the fact that they've done the thing that I've wanted all temples to do, I've advised about 90 or so temples in the world.
Yeah.
Only a few are able to take this up because, finances are tight for everybody.
Sure.
But turning the temple into what it used to be, which was a nexus of all culture, community, social activity, social development, community development. Why shouldn't you be able to go as a Hindu to your temple and expect that the temple authorities would have figured out, okay, here are some professionals that we can link you guys together with,
right,
so that you can benefit as people.
Is that working right now? Do you find that that's happening?
It's working like a charm in the Shiva Vishnu temple. They even established something called, the Center for Dharma Education.
Wow.
And they've held town halls on various things such as mental health, such as domestic abuse, such as LGBTQIA issues, and how you provide spaces for them and help people from our communities who belong to these kinds of identities too. So things are changing.
Wow, that would be great to have that out there more.
Oh yeah, one of the most, on apparition's sake, you've got 12 Brahmins who have passed the biggest exams in India before they were invited to become pandits there.
Yeah.
And even these very, 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 who people would look at them and say, oh, they must be so orthodox. They probably won't even drink the water we offer them.
Yeah.
That kind of nonsense doesn't exist there.
Wow.
So I'm glad that there are beacons of light, such as SSVT, such as the Hindu Temple. There are other temples across the land.
Sure.
That are really challenging people's outdated Victorian notions about what it means to be Hindu.
Right. Because I imagine a lot of these traditions existed well before the British came anyway. Like you said, there's the tradition of writing versus what the people did on the ground, right? So that's something to keep in mind. It's hit the hour. I know you have a lot to do. Thank you so much for your time. It just, it was fantastic. Hopefully this was a good experience for you. And I look forward to hopefully at some point meeting you in person once all this COVID craziness goes away and then you're back in the States. But do you have anything else that you want to touch upon or to plug?
I would basically just say that always think of how to support people's deep dives into Dharma and its ways of thinking. And also think about how to create that kind of community in America. We can't go along anymore with our eyes blinkered because there are a lot more people who have realized what is possible if they get hold of us. So let's try and be aware, focus on our community building, see how it goes through our children's development, not just take them to school, Bal Vihar while they're at school, but think about now while they're at university, at this most formative time when they're away from parents, away from families, away from the community that they're used to. Is there a way that they can be encouraging of inquisitiveness in a dharmic way at these places as well? And if so, they should definitely get in touch with, there's the North American Hindu Chaplains Association that was founded recently. There are organizations that are doing really good work, but stay away from that conflation of the need for dharma and allegiances to one's various motherlands.
Yes.
Those are two separate discussions. To conflate both of them would lead to the destruction of all of them.
Yes, yes. Brahmachari, where can people reach you if they want to?
If they do,
yeah.
If they do want to contact or get in touch, just find out a little bit more. dharmiclife.georgetown.edu is a good place to start. We're actually going to be opening a Dharmic center on Georgetown's campus.
Excellent.
So we're quite excited with that. Again, all student initiatives. I had nothing to do with that.
Is that going to be Hindu, Buddhist, Jain?
Correct. We'll have a Jinalaya, we'll have a Bodhalaya, and we'll also have a Shiva shrine for Shaivas, Vaishnavas, and Shaktas as well.
And is our Sikhism also included there, or are they?
Because Sikhism doesn't do shrines,
se,
we will have photographic, a nice painting representation of the 10 gurus.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, Brahmachari, thank you so much for your time and just helping me learn more about Nimbarka and yourself. And again, thank you. And Jai Radha Krishna.
Jai Radha Krishna, Namaskaram. Thank you so much for
Yamuna